All right, let's talk a little bit about football. In my last episode, I talked a little bit about the game my era grew up with, 70s, 80s, even a little bit of the 90s versus the modern era, and had a conversation with a friend about it, and it provoked a little more thought. So again, going back at some of the players that were standouts back like 70s, 80s, early 90s, even that were undeniable that I think could play in today's game as follows. Let's get Walter Payton, Barry Sanders, and Earl Campbell off the list right away. Those guys were playing at such a high level. I'd be shocked if the game ever evolves to a point where those men couldn't jump in and play. Again, this is just speculation on my part, but I do have a pretty good background and experience in the subject, so take it for what it's worth. All right, LT, boom, definitely modern day player. Jerry Rice, his numbers probably wouldn't stack up with the modern day receivers, but his ability to perform at such a near perfect level, I believe would allow him to play in today's game. Wilbur Marshall, undersized, but that dude was like a freaking, just like a warp zone, the way he could break on the ball and attack and zero down and just make plays based on pure speed and precision. So I'm gonna say Wilbur Marshall could play at a modern level. Some of you guys won't like to hear this, and trust me, he was one of my favorite players of all time growing up. Chicago Bears middle linebacker Mike Singletary. I don't think he could play modern level football. I just flat out don't. Now, I could be wrong, and it's taken nothing away from Mike Singletary. He was a master of his craft in his day. I just don't think his general faculty would let him perform at today's tempo. Again, I could be wrong. Blast from the past, Ray Nitschke. Now, I do believe Ray Nitschke could play in the modern game. Dude was big, man, 6'3", 270, and maybe they even play him at a different position. But I think that's a guy from that era that absolutely could play in the modern game. You looked at him, the way he demolished people on the field, he was in another world back in his heyday. Now, this is going to get a lot of people upset, especially Chicago people. Dick Butkus. I truly don't think Dick Butkus, as he was prepared to play, could play in the modern level. Now, he was nasty. He was a master of his craft at the time, but I just don't think he had the physic. How could I put this? If you look at a lot of his tackles, it was just like barroom brawling, and he did make plays, and he was a beast. I'm taking nothing away from him in the era that he played. But his overall athletic attributes, I just don't think could fit in today's game. Now, had he grown up with the training advantage that the modern athletes have, that's a whole different story. I'm just talking about as shown, plucking that athlete from the past and sticking them into the modern game. And I just don't think Dick Butkus would make the cut. Let's argue about it. No, just kidding. But if you got an opinion, please share it with me. Howie Long. Yeah, I think Howie Long could probably play in today's game. Dude was pretty slick, man. A lot of power, a lot of finesse, a lot of speed. I don't think he'd be nearly the standout he was in his era, but my hunch is he'd probably be okay playing modern ball. Now everybody knows Clay Matthews, from the modern game. But going back in time, Bruce Matthews and the original Clay Matthews, those cats were kind of a step ahead, man. I think they were probably onto some deeper level athletic performance for their time. And look at their prodigy, Clay Matthews. So you guys might not even know who the heck Bruce Matthews is, but check him out. Google him. He's a freaking terror on the field back in the day. Okay, here's an athlete that I truly believe could play at a high level in the modern game. I don't think there's any D lineman that you could compare him to. That's John Randall from the Minnesota Vikings. He was not that huge of a person by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think he had to be. The dude was like a freaking Tasmanian devil. Relentless motor, power, speed, acceleration. And I talked to some guys that actually played football with him. They said he was like a little kid on freaking high sugar all of the time. The dude never got tired. He was relentless. He had technique. He blew people up. He ran people down from behind, made sacks, played against the run. He made plays downfield. In my opinion, he's one of the best defensive linemen of all time, period, point blank. So all right, let's talk about a couple other players that were standouts in their day that I do not think could cut it in today's game. Again, being a Chicago Bears fan growing up, both these quarterbacks played for the Bears at one time. Doug Flutie and Jim McMahon, both phenomenal players in their day. But I just honestly think if you plug them in on today's field with the intensity, the speed, and the precision that the defenses offer, I don't think either of these quarterbacks could play at all. And this is not an insult to them. It's just a commentary as to how, from an athletic ability standpoint, the game has evolved and developed. So, again, I'm curious to hear anybody's opinion on this subject. I find it quite fascinating, the evolution of sports. To give you an example, if any of you guys are familiar with Mark Spitz, when we were growing up, Mark Spitz was synonymous with swimming. He won 6 gold medals in one Olympics or something like that. He was the absolute best swimmer of his day. And I heard a stat that his times would not even make the cut on the women's team today. So I find that fascinating. What has changed? Preparation, psychology, the psychological barriers that exist to push performance thresholds. When I had my D1 performance business, a big segment of our clientele were swimmers, and this is back in late 90s, early 2000s, and I was able to sell a local coach on the benefits of heavy, specific strength training and using the weight room as a means of creating a more powerful swimmer. And at the time, that seemed kind of crazy. There was still this notion floating around that spending time in the weight room would actually be detrimental to a swimmer's performance. Well, a few years later, I believe in Illinois, in the women's side, my clients owned 80% of the records. I mean, they felt like dominoes. And we made some noise, man. We had, oh gosh, I forget how many D1 scholarship athletes we kicked out. But, we made a pretty big impact in the swimming performance world. I even had the women at the time, the women's Olympic head coach, come to visit and watch some of our training. And he just sat there, took it all in, taking notes, and he approached me at the end of the workout. And he's like, "Where the heck did you learn this stuff?" And I just said, "Man, I've just been studying this my whole life." And believe it or not, as a child, I was a competitive swimmer for a little while. And when the experience that let me understand how important maximizing one's strength is to maximize speed in the water was before my senior college football season. My buddies and I went to the public pool and actually just go scope out some chicks and cool off and have a good time. But they had evidently a youth swim team had been practicing there earlier that day or whatever, and they still had their clock set up by the pool, and it was still functioning. So I was like, what the heck? I haven't swam a 50 freestyle in a long time. I just watched the clock, pushed off, and blew out a 50 free as hard as I could. Now keep in mind, I had not done any formal swim practice in a long time from that point. And just pushing off the wall without any real swim experience, I blew out a 23-second 50-yard freestyle. Keep in mind, at the time, I was very, very powerful. I was squatting 900 pounds, doing 850 for 5 reps, bench pressing 500 for reps, and walking around at 310 pounds. So I remember I just kind of put that as it was just a reminder. I don't know if a reminder, it dawned on me that, my goodness, if we actually use this kind of strength training and dialed it in for swim performance, we can create some monsters. So a few years later, when I actually had my sports performance business, I had the opportunity to put some of those principles and theories at work, and they worked. They worked big time, man. One of my clients went on to be a 9-time All-American at the University of Georgia. I had kids coast to coast, knocking on major records. And interesting, something I really noticed too was when most of the athletes that spent their high school career training within our program did not see the same type of results once they got to the college level. Most of them still did get faster, but just the flat out reality is, at the time, most of the college athletic strength programs just couldn't hold a candle to the type of like strength development and specific performance development that we help these kids develop. And times have changed. Times have changed. If you look at the modern strength and conditioning programs for swimmers, they've caught up. You look at like this, the times have just like, they're ridiculous. You got kids like swimming 50-yard freestyles in like 18 seconds. I don't really pay that close of attention to the current records, but I do know that the trend now for sprint specific swimmers is to spend a lot more time in the weight room developing like speed and explosive power, and really maximizing how much energy they can generate. Something to keep in mind for any sprint or power work, like compressing energy into a smaller amount of time is what it's all about. That's a kind of a different subject for another day, but sports keep evolving, athletes keep evolving. The genetics of a human being, I don't really think have changed. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when a barrier is broken, it changes the reality of what is acceptable intrinsically. And last show I talked about like the 4-minute mile barrier being broken. Once it was broken, which the experts said was not a possibility, like in that same year, 25 other people broke that 4-minute mile barrier. So kind of makes me think. I remember Ernie Franz talking about the importance of the reality set within your training environment. Your team, your training crew, track, whatever it is. When a reality is established, let me back up and give you an example. At the Franz Sports Center back in the early and mid 90s, our crew was like head and shoulders above, almost any other training crew I can think of. We had guys blasting like north of 1,000-pound squats consistently, and for that time, that was pretty much unheard of. So when the bar was set at like 1,000 and 1,100 pounds, an 800 or 900-pound squat didn't seem that hard. Still a heck of a lot of weight. It's still badass. It's still highly respectable, but the number of guys that we had in that 800 and 900-pound squat range were like unbelievable. Shoot, we had guys 181 pounds that were squatting over 800 pounds at the time, because the reality was set. The bar was set high, and seeing someone, I remember one day we watched Bill Nichols hit an 1,145-pound squat, and he actually smoked it. Freaking side note, the guy had like blood coming out of his ears and mouth, and his eyeball was going to blow out of the side of his head, but the reality was set that day that an 1,145-pound squat was possible. So all of a sudden, whatever weight that we were squatting, the individual was squatting, became a lot lighter after seeing that reality take place and right in front of us. So that leads me to the next topic, visualization, how important visualization is as it relates to high performance. I remember in one of the classes I actually attended when I was playing college football was a volleyball coaching class. I actually liked it. I like volleyball. I think it's a pretty cool sport. But we had to design a template for an entire season of team training. And within the template that I developed, I dedicated a pretty significant amount of time to visualization, meditation, and the psychological aspect of performance. And the teacher marked me down on it. She said if I had replaced that with something else, I probably would have got an A in the project. But she thought that was a complete waste of time, and I ended up getting a C or whatever. I didn't really give a shit anyway. I knew I was right, and I just liked the class because we got to throw down and play some volleyball, and there were a lot of badass girls in the class anyway. But just thought that was interesting. That was, I think the year was 1992 or something like that. And but I think now if you look at advancement in sport, I think most coaches would agree that the psychological approach and taking the time to visualize high performance and have the mental preparedness is literally, I'd say, on par equally. It's just as important as physical preparedness. It's hand in hand because the mind is part of the body. Thoughts become energy, attitude becomes reality, and state of mind is so critical for achieving high performance, regardless of what that arena is. Okay, moving on.